There he is. The man, the myth, the legend, the writer, the photographer. Yes, we have.
How you doing?
Good. How you been?
Good. In there.
Well, we've been here a few times, and today would be not a bad day for opening day.
This would be about as good of an opening day as I've ever had. And we're in the middle of February.
There's no snowflakes.
Yeah.
And now, is this a Kingman Day, or is this? There's no flags? What do we got going here? I don't know if it's coming in off the lake or out.
It's hard to tell. Pretty windy though.
Well, let's mosey on into Murph's and
Right.
go from there. So how you been?
I'm doing good. Haven't seen you in a while.
I know, it's been a while. This pandemic is sort of causing glitches in social activities. But I think we're in the twilight.
I don't know if we're supposed to be going here.
I don't know either, but it looks like no one else, not many are here. Hi. Well, we've been in this place a few times for your book releases, parties, and
Quite a day.
yeah, that was awesome, man.
That was, we had a Cubsessions show up, we had a Clydesdale horse show up.
That was unbelievable. You had Steve Trout, right?
Trout was there. Fergie Jenkins showed up at one
Oh
point.
my gosh.
Yeah, it was quite an experience.
George Castle, was he there that day too? Maybe not.
Maybe he was.
Yeah, that was spectacular. Now we're going to get into all that stuff because you've got a great website that tells a lot about you, randyrichardson.co, right?
Yep. It's
And
fairly new.
it's very well done. It has your bio, it has your novels, your collaboration with Becky Sarwate on Cubsessions. It has your essays that published various publications, and it has your photography, which just seems to be a new.
It all started with the pandemic. I was looking for a way to get outside. I've lived in Evanston now for, I don't know, 25 years probably. And, I've been along the lakefront here and there, but I've never really explored it. And I just needed to get outside. And, when you go out at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning, you have the place to yourself. And I kind of thought this is a perfect way to spend the pandemic and sort of escape from it. And that's what it became for me. And I just started taking pictures. Whenever the sun came up, I was, there's lakes, there's beaches all along Evanston shore. I think there's 5 of them all together. And I had been to a few of them before, but I hadn't been to all of them before. And there's just all these little places that I had never even seen before. And for me, it was sort of an awakening that I didn't expect, and it just kind of became a thing. And I think for me, it was an escape. It was a way to deal with the pandemic, and just a way to get outside. It seemed like other people were just enjoying to be able to see the pictures that I was taking. So, I just kept doing it, and it kind of went something beyond what I ever really anticipated, which is probably true for most of the things in my life.
Well, yeah. I mean, you kind of follow your wanderlust, and I was thinking of a good way to describe when you're out there. I call it. I came up with 0 god awful 30. It's like the time that you're out there taking photos when it's 10 degrees below zero.
It's crazy cold.
It's
insane cold. The other day when I was out there, it was -7 degrees wind chill. And this was when the waves were about 7 feet high, I think. And some of those waves were hitting me while I was standing there taking the
Oh
picture.
my God.
And it was about as cold as I've ever been, but I was waiting for that one shot, and I knew if I got it, it was going to be a great shot, and I waited about 5-10 minutes, I don't know, and I got it, and then I ran to my car.
Well, you got the shot because I
shot.
saw some comments. You post these on social media, and I follow you, and somebody said this is your best one yet. You could you could see the power in the wave. I mean,
Well, I mean, I had it all set up. I mean, it was you can see the Chicago skyline in the background, but I wanted to get that splash of the wave along the ice, along the lakefront, and I was standing out there for a good 5-10 minutes just waiting for that perfect wave, and then it hit, and I snapped it, and then I ran. That's basically how it worked out.
Well, I mean, some of these photos are almost otherworldly. They almost feel like you're on the African continent or something. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? It's incredibly beautiful. Like, I wouldn't recommend it to anybody, quite frankly, because it could be really hard to get up that early, especially when you're going out into sub-zero temperatures. But it really is amazing what you see out there.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Were you trained in that anyway?
Well, when I have a background in journalism, and I had to take photography classes for journalism, and my early jobs as a journalist, I actually had to take my own photos too. This is very old school, before we actually had iPhones and things like that that could take. So I did. I have a little bit of experience in taking photos, but it's certainly not anything that I consider myself to be an expert at. But I just sort of, I guess I'm mostly just self-taught, I guess. Which is true for most of the things that I've done.
Well, you're an interesting character because you're an attorney. That's what you've been for 30 years now, right?
Yeah.
So you've come
Sad,
off.
but true, yes.
But it's a fascinating field, and you probably wear a suit and tie, and I think of you coming out ripping your suit off with an A underneath for artist, because you're like Clark Kent in this. You've got your day job, and then you have all these other interests outside.
Yeah, well, I mean, I maybe when I first started my job as an attorney, I wore a suit. I haven't worn one in years. And for the last 2 years now, we've been stuck at home. I have not seen my office in 2 years. And it looks like probably I'm going to be stuck at home for another 6 months from now. So I have not even, the day I left, I remember it was the middle of March of 2020, and I just assumed we were going to be back in another week or two. I have not seen my office, so they won't even let us go back in there. I mean, they're just starting now to let people go back in there, but that hasn't happened yet. And so I have not. I mean, I have papers and things there that have been sitting there for 2 years now.
Oh my goodness! Holy moly! Now, back to your site. You also have a lot of essays that you have on there, and I'd like to get into a little bit of your family history that you know of. And you have one called The Naked Stranger. That sounds like a great. It sounds like it's a great story of you visiting your grandparents in Phoenix, and it sounds like you had. I mean, just an aside, in terms of what you've written, I've read what I could of your stuff, and I can't think of a more relatable novels or books that, for myself personally, you've got Lost in the Ivy, which is about a murder mystery in Wrigleyville, where I live. My first condo was right across the street from here, 37.
I mean, it was inspired by when I first moved to Wrigleyville.
Yeah, and it's the Cubs, and it's all that stuff, and the characters are phenomenal. And then you've got Cheeseland. You've got 3 high school kids that are, and those are my friends Brent and Jim from high school.
I mean, it was obviously inspired by real life events too. I mean, I tend to write what I know. I mean, some people think that's a good thing, some people don't, but that's what I like to do. I take little nuggets from my life, and I see if you change things a little bit, just the slightest amount in how things could have gone differently.
Yeah, but for me personally, it's like, oh my God, he's writing about like what I lived through. The Led Zeppelin 8-track cassette tapes. I had one of those in my car when I was in high school, and it just, and then going up to Wisconsin to drink underage, and all these things. Are like, oh my God.
I have one of my friends who was part of the road trip that inspired that. He still has an 8-track that he keeps in his garage. He's that serious about it.
Oh goodness. So, in terms of, it sounds like you had sort of an idyllic childhood in a way, in terms of almost free range, you know, kind of doing some, you know, having a life that a lot of kids these days don't have.
Different, yeah. It's different than what the kids today live.
Yeah. You know, you're out there probably, reminds me of like, who was the comedian? Oh, he's now in prison, or was it? you know, going out to the dump and playing in the in the broken glass. You know, you're out there traveling across country with you and your sister to visit your grandparents.
Yeah.
So, a little bit about your family history, like your grandparents. You know anything about how you got to where you are here?
I mean, I know a lot about my family history because my mom has written genealogy books about my family, but
fabulous.
I mean, it was actually started by me. I was the one that started the genealogy research, but she's the one that took it to a whole other level and, you know, started writing books about it.
Holy cow.
Which was way beyond anything that I ever imagined. But yeah, so I mean, my family, we grew up in Alexandria, Virginia, just out across the Potomac from Washington, D.C. My dad was living in D.C. at the time, working in D.C. For the Future Farmers of America.
Huh.
He's an agricultural journalist, always has been. So I don't really remember a whole lot about that part of my life. I mean, we moved by the time I think I was about 5, 6. But my parents both grew up in Arizona, in Phoenix, which is where obviously my grandparents are from. But they actually came from, or at least on my mom's side, my grandmother, she came from California, Northern California.
Oh, wow.
But so my parents moved to Milwaukee, or just a suburb just outside of Milwaukee, when I was in kindergarten, first grade, and that was in West Dallas, and we lived there for, I believe it was about 2 or 3 years. So I don't really have a whole lot of memory about that. I was there for the big snow, and I remember that, you know, in '67.
Oh yeah.
It was crazy. I mean, we had like, you know, big mounds of snow, and, you know, building the snow forts and all that kind of stuff. I have vague memories of that, and I have vague memories of the friends that I had then. But it's, you know, it didn't really, you know, for the most part, I don't remember that part of my life. And then from there, we moved to the south suburbs of Chicago when I was in the 3rd grade. And we lived in the south suburbs for most of my young adult life. I mean, really all of my young adult life. So we moved there when I was in the 3rd grade, and I basically lived there, you know, up until I went away to college. And we originally moved to a country called Hills. Then my parents divorced when I was in the 5th grade. So my dad ended up moving to Crete. My mom moved to Hazel Crest. Eventually we moved to Homewood. I went to Homewood Flossmoor High School. So we moved around a lot in my young age. And so, I mean, like, from the time that up until I was in high school, I felt like every 2 years was a move for us. I mean, that's just the way it was. I mean, and I was never really happy about that, but that was just the life that we led. But yeah, I mean, so that the essay that you mentioned, The Naked Stranger, was about how my mom, this was after they divorced, my mom would send my sister and I off to visit to stay with my
Your maternal grandparents.
my maternal grandparents.
Sure.
Every summer, basically, in Phoenix, which is, like the worst time to go to Phoenix. It's in the middle of the summer. But, for us, it was like an escape. And my grandmother's house really was like this exotic place. It was like an adventure land. I mean, there was a pool in the backyard. Like, literally all the neighbors came to my grandmother's place because it was a fun place to be. There were animals all over the place. They had a pet skunk. They had horses. I mean, I learned to ride horses when I was there. I mean, we had tarantulas in the house. We had, I mean, it really was like, a night at the zoo, kind of thing. And that's how I remembered it. I mean, my grandmother was into collections. She had just huge collections of everything. And her, she had a huge gem and mineral collection. She collected Santa Clauses, but her biggest collection was bells. That was her thing. I mean, she just loved bells. So they were all over the house, and so we're always ringing bells, And but that's how I remember my childhood. I mean, I probably remember more about those summers than I remember any part of my childhood and anything. So yeah, that essay was about my grandmother and. How every year, basically every summer, we would spend it with her. And so we were incredibly close, and she used to take us on all these adventures. I mean, we traveled everywhere with her in their camper. My grandfather and her, they took us all over the West in their camper. We went we'd go across the border to Mexico. We'd go all the way up to along the coast, along California. I mean, it truly was an adventure, and that was my life as a kid, and it was pretty great life. I mean, I thought it was like I couldn't wait for summers.
That's awesome.
But yeah, and then the story that I wrote about is she ended up having Alzheimer's, and the Naked Stranger was about this story and one of these adventures that she took us on. We were up in Northern California at this just incredibly idyllic kind of mountaintop kind of place. It's everything like that you would think of like Sound of Music kind of place. There was like nobody else around, and we're playing around and looking around and just looking at the beauty of this place. And this is basically, it was the same area where my grandmother grew up. I mean, that was her home, and we're at this little pond, and this is the way I remember it, and my grandfather is standing there with me and my sister. I'm about 10, my sister's a couple of years younger than I, and this young couple shows up at the pond, and my grandmother's at the pond, and she starts talking to this young couple, and they start taking off their clothes, and my grandfather, he's like covering our eyes, and we're like trying to get peeks at what's going on. And my grandfather eventually just starts laughing because it's the funniest thing he's ever seen. Because my grandmother is just having this conversation with this young nude couple, and it's one of those things that just absolutely sticks in your mind. And that's how I always thought of my grandmother. She would literally talk to anybody. I mean, and it didn't matter who they were, whether they were wearing clothes or not. She would talk to anybody, and so that was the whole, that was the arc behind the essay, The Naked Stranger. And when she got diagnosed with Alzheimer's, it was really hard to see her again because for the first time in my life, I was talking to a person that I recognized, but she didn't recognize me, and for the way that I saw that is that I became like the naked stranger. She was talking to me, but she didn't know me, and so it was, that was a hard part of my life.
Your family must have gotten here pretty early. I mean, if your grandparents were already settled out west.
They were pretty early settlers out there.
And you have another, I think it's another essay where you you talk about your parents. You were, like you said, in 5th grade when they were divorced, and I have a similar arc with my parents in 2nd grade getting divorced. But then afterwards, they were people that you liked even more, you know, after they separated, which is really, because it seems like maybe they found their true selves or something.
Yeah, I mean, they obviously were not the same people that I thought that they were.
Yeah.
You know, I think you don't really realize sometimes who your parents are until you grow up.
Yep.
That was definitely true with me. Like it was sort of an awakening for me, and yeah, I mean, you know, dealing with divorce, as you obviously know, is just not an easy thing to do when you're a young kid, and it was very hard, and especially having to move every couple of years made it even harder.
Yeah.
You know, like every time we moved, I'm losing friends too. I mean,
Yeah.
so I mean, not only was you're losing your parents, it felt like it's to some extent you're also losing your friends.
Yeah, your base of support. And
Yeah.
So, and a lot of those stories that you have on your site are around that period of early adolescence or pre-adolescence, where it seems like memories just get seared into your your cortex at those years. It's great, you know that.
I like to look back and I guess the way I like to think about it is I mean I live a lot in the past. I mean, and I still do. I mean, I think about how I might have done things differently. And that's kind of, I think, the way I look at a lot of the things, or even like the novels that I've written, is how, both of the novels that I wrote, I probably, they were kind of traumatic experiences in my life that, changed me. And like, I thought, what if things had not gone the way that they did? What if those things had not happened to me? And, how would my life be different? I mean, that's how I look at a lot of my writings. I mean, it's like I take these little pieces and I look at how I might have done things differently, or how things might have turned out differently, or how I might have turned out differently, or how people around me might have turned out differently if things had, not happened the way that they had happened.
Yeah, I mean, that's got to be, Lost in the Ivy, the characters. I mean, you've got drag queens, you've got judges, you've got police officers, you've got press reporters, you've got, editors of newspapers. To inhabit all these characters, and how is that process like? Are you just enmeshed in that world does it take a while to come out of that? Or how?
When I'm writing it?
Yeah.
I love being in those worlds when I'm writing. It takes me back to those places. That world that you're talking about, the courts and all that stuff. That was my life.
Yeah.
I mean, I was a journalist working in the courthouses. I mostly worked down in the Markham courthouse, but I also occasionally made my way to 26 in California. Sometimes to the Dirksen building for federal cases. But I mean, that was my job. I mean, it was my beat, covering horrible crimes, pretty much. I mean, so I knew that life, and I knew the people that were involved in that life. I basically every day that's what I lived. I mean, the judge in that is loosely based on a judge that I covered. He ended up being convicted of a crime of stealing from the bench. I mean, that was the life that I knew. I mean, the character that was, that is, the main character in that is obviously loosely based on me.
Yeah.
At the time, I was living on Bradley Place in Chicago, which is just a little bit north of where we're at right now.
Yeah.
It was at the corner of Halsted Street and Bradley Place. The apartments, I think they're now condos, which are beautiful condos. They were not so beautiful then. They were small, kind of old, very small, $500 a month studio apartments. And it was a very unusual group of people living there.
Yeah.
It was my first experience living in Chicago. I always lived in the south suburbs up until then. I'd been a Cubs fan all my life, even growing up in the south suburbs. I became a Cubs fan, and that's a whole other story. But the story that inspired it was I had this neighbor who lived in the apartment directly across from where I live. You know, we both live in these very thin-walled studio apartments. He was gay, I'm not, and he was very flamboyant about it, which, you know, I had never really experienced any of that. Like, it was just all new to me, for the most part. I mean, we didn't get along, I would say, for the most part, but he, you know, he would have these kind of really loud parties, and I had to work. I was still working at the time. I had just started my new job as an attorney, and I was kind of just trying to find my, you know, footing as a new attorney in the city, and, you know, every night I'd hear these loud parties across the hallway. I was never invited to any of these parties. But you know, I got to know some of the neighbors. Like, I hardly ever talked to him. I mean, I think we had an exchange of words here and there, but it was, for the most part...
Is this the Jimmy Dart character? Oh, okay, all right.
I didn't know him at all. I mean, in reality, I mean, I made them all up, you know, I mean, for the book. But so my next door neighbor is this young budding actress, kind of a mousy girl, which you wouldn't expect for an actress, right? I mean, usually, but she definitely was.
Like a Zooey Deschanel type?
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
And then on the other side of me was this other woman, a little bit older, who was a bartender, and she
that's
was
Lizzie, right?
She was no, she was not Lizzie, but she was the more talkative of the two, and she would be the one that would basically tell me and the other girl what was going on around, you know, the hallway. And so that's where we got all the information from. So anything I ever knew, I basically got from her. But then one day I come home from my job and I find out that, you know, there's like police tape around my neighbor's door. And it's like, what the hell happened here? And he, you know, I learned from my neighbor that he has died. You know, and this is a young guy. I mean, you know, mid-20s, I'm guessing. I don't really know, but that's what I'm guessing, because that's what I was. And he, you know, it just started all these rumors about what had happened to him. You know, and there, you know, rumors that he got killed. But I mean, I think ultimately what most likely happened was that he overdosed. I mean, I guess it was probably a drug thing. But I never really knew any of that. I mean, I just, you know, nobody ever really found out. I mean, it was just kind of a shock to, you know, like, come home and like, okay, yeah, your neighbor, this young guy, you know, who, you know, you've never really known, but yeah, he's been like living across from you for almost a year, and all of a sudden you find out that he's dead. It was just like kind of, wow, this is kind of strange and weird, and like it just makes you think about what might have happened. And all of that started boiling over in my head. You know, I mean, I started thinking about, you know, what if, you know, this kind of, you know, unusual character who I happen to have a, you know, very loose relationship, what if I had been charged with his murder? And it just like that kind of grew into the story, Lost in the Ivy, and that's what the story grew out of. I mean, I'd never written fiction in my life up until that point. I hadn't. I was a journalist up until that point, before I became an attorney, but I had never written fiction. I had never even taken a fiction writing class, so I had no background in writing fiction. And so I basically just started writing this, fiction story based on, my own life experience as a journalist and my experiences working in all these courthouses, and all, what I'd seen, the things that I had seen over the years, and I built it into this neighborhood,
Yeah.
and that's basically, it took me, I think it took me about 5 years altogether to finally write all that, before it was, finally all became actual story. When I first started, I didn't really know what it was going to be, if it was going to be anything. But yeah, that's how it kind of came about.
And so that was '05, and it wasn't long after that, maybe in your quest for getting information on this new endeavor of yours, you started the CWA, right? The Chicago Writers Association. Is that where that?
So yeah, that's a whole other story too. When I wrote the book, like I said, I had no background in writing fiction, and when I was finally done with it, I had no idea what to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt kind of like the character in my novel, like I felt like I was lost and trying to find myself. And I found this small Yahoo group called the Chicago Writers Association, and that's all it was at the time, was just a Yahoo group. It was started by another attorney named Diana Lascaris. There were, maybe 50 people involved in that, group, but they were fairly active, and we basically all communicated by email. That's what Yahoo groups were.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, Diana took a leave and asked me to take over the Yahoo group. And while she was away, I started asking others if, maybe we could make something more out of this Yahoo group.
Mm-hmm.
And so originally I just said, does anybody want to do a newsletter? And somebody volunteered to do a newsletter. And then I asked, does somebody want to start a website? And so somebody started a very, it was very, in those days.
It was a dawn, yeah.
Yeah, it was very early in the days of websites, but this guy had background in writing websites, and he knew how to do it, and he did it. So we had our own website, and so it just kind of, what was just a Yahoo group became a little bit more, and then we started meeting, a few of us. I think we had about 13 people that were part of a steering committee deciding what we were going to do with this group, and we eventually decided we were going to make a nonprofit out of it.
Wow.
And it was at that time, and I remember this so distinctly, because I was at Diana's house, and I think everybody assumed, and that certainly included me, that she was going to be the one who would take this to the next level.
It's like being on a condo association board, right? Oh, you're the new president.
Right. She pulled me aside, and she goes, all of this is not my envision of what this group ever was or is, And she goes, it's all you. And I go, well, no, I don't think that's at all true. This is there's 13 of us here. And she goes, this was all started by you. And she goes,
you're the reason we're stuck here right now.
And so, sort of by default, I became the president of this budding nonprofit.
Wow.
And that was around 2006 going into 2008 when I think we first got our nonprofit designation.
Wow, that's great.
So yeah, and I was elected president, and I've been president ever since.
That's incredible.
Except for there was a 2-year roughly period where I wasn't, a little less than 2 years. Somebody else took over because I was kind of just worn out by it all, and that didn't work out so well, and so I was elected president again. And I haven't been able to get out of it.
It's like George Washington, he couldn't leave.
Yeah, but we grew from what was then, we were 13 people when we first started the nonprofit, and now we have close to, we're just under 1,000
Holy
dues-paying members.
cow, that's incredible.
It is pretty incredible
That's
when I look
amazing.
back on it. I mean, and you know, to think how far we've come and all the things that we've done with it over the years.
And it's one of the primary goals is to provide resources for writers, right? So you have you have a conference coming up. I think you haven't had one in a while because of the pandemic, but you've got one coming up, right?
Yeah, it looks like we're finally going to be able to have it after 2 years. Yeah, that started. This will be our third conference. I think we're going to have about 200 people at the Allerton Hotel. Which I'm, you know, to be able to do that again is just a good feeling. I mean, the person who directs it has been literally heartbroken over the last 2 years. I mean, it was originally scheduled for March of 2020. Bad timing, right?
Yeah, it doesn't get worse than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's been postponed for 2 years since then.
Holy cow.
So yeah, it looks like we're finally going to be able to do it again. But yeah, you know, the Chicago Literary Hall of Fame grew out of our organization.
Yeah. That's what I was going to get. It kind of segues into that, and that's around the time I think we met, 2007 or 8.
Yeah.
And so there was it the Lovable Losers thing? That's
Lovable Losers Literary Revue.
Yeah, that was at El Jardín.
El Jardín,
Yeah.
in the year 2008.
Yeah.
We had a reading series that was started by Don Evans. It became a book anthology that he started, and I was sort of his right-hand man, I guess. That's how I met you. You were part of that. I was always the one that who had the camera kind of like yours, and
it's the same, maybe the same thing.
I still laugh, just probably more with your video than any other. You were,
Is this the Carrie Muscat?
Carrie Muscat was doing a reading, and she's sort of a respected, Chicago baseball journalist. And Don Evans put you in the background with your
the SHAWON-O-METER,
SHAWON-O-METER, and she was reading an essay from her book. I forget what the book was called. It was like Thanks to Sandberg to Santo or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly, but it was something of that. But she was reading an essay from it, and it was about Sean Dunston, and that's why Don put you in the background with your SHAWON-O-METER. And every time she would say the name Sean Dunston, you would get up with your SHAWON-O-METER, and you would start yelling, Sean, SHAWON-O-METER, and you start throwing out the numbers at her.
I think I clocked her on the
I think you hit her once, and she had no idea that any of this was going to happen. It was just, that's what made it so funny.
It was an unruly, those were fun evenings, I have to say. They were, oh my God.
I mean, we made a lot of news, too. I mean, we made the front page of the Chicago Sun-Times at one point, which, and we were in the Chicago Tribune covered us. It was a lot of fun. It was a fun summer. I mean, and it's the kind of thing that you would probably never see today.
Yeah.
Which is sad, because those are the kind of things that I love about. You bring together a group of people that from otherwise probably we all are sort of connected in a way by our connection to the Cubs, but none of us had ever met, and you brought us all together into this place. It was once a month, and it just it turned into this explosion of fun. I mean, that's the way I always looked at it.
It was the cast of characters. You had the writers,
cast of characters. There were musical artists. There were poets. There was one guy who, God, what was he? He would. What was the instrument that he played?
Oh,
you know
I think I was there that night. Yeah.
I wish I could remember it, because it was unlike anything that I had ever seen before.
Yeah, like Lynn Bramer, I think, was at one of those.
Yeah, he was there. I mean, I read my essays there a couple times. You know, we had a lot of really great writers there. But yeah, it was a fun. It was just a fun experience. The group, the Cleaning Ladies. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah.
They sang there once. I mean, when the Cubs win the World Series, which you know, at the time none of us ever thought was going to happen.
It's great that you were able to document that too, so
Yeah.
it's out there if anyone wants to find it. So, and then that sort of segues into your collaboration with
Sid. What was his name?
who the musician guy?
No, the guy that did the weird music. He's a throat singer. Sid. God, what was his last name?
Did he hold it up to his neck or something?
Yeah, he sang. He throat sang "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." I think. Does that sound right?
It was like Coney Island.
It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. I don't know, but that was the kind of thing that you would get there. It's just all these kind of unusual characters that all came together once a month, and
because it was like, I mean, to be a Cub fan, you've got to be sort of out there to begin with. So you've got all these fringe characters.
right.
Oh, is it funny? So then your most recent work is with Becky Sarwate, right? You guys did Cubsessions. That was quite an interesting endeavor too, right? To getting in touch with all those Cub fans?
Well, I mean, that was all the idea of my publishers at Eckhart's Press, and it was their idea, and they came to me with the idea, and when they approached me with it, and I just it seemed like a lot for me to do on my own, and I just didn't know I was going to have the time to do it, and at the time I knew Becky from we were working or writing together. She was the president of the Illinois Women's Press Association at the time, and so that was my connection to her, and I had invited her to write at the time for a website called Wrigleyville Nation.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And and they still have a podcast, but they've done away with the writing aspect of it. But at the time, she was sort of a partner with me in writing for the website. And so I asked her if she would want to do it, and she had never done anything like that before, and she was obviously more than willing to be a part of it, and so we made a good team. I mean, but yeah, it was like all these people that I kind of looked at from afar, but never really knew. All these, it's for people who don't know, Cubsessions is sort of all these celebrity Cubs fans, and people like Steve Trout, who obviously I've watched, 1984. I mean, he was a big part of the 1984 Chicago Cubs, which is one of my favorite teams.
And talk about characters.
And definitely a character. He became a big part of that. He introduced me to all these Chicago Cubs players, and gave me the connections to them. I mean, we've since become good friends, and it was through that I got to know Ronnie who I'd always seen him, sitting out in the bleachers, never had talked to him. Now I, see him all the time. Where we hang out in the bleachers. You and I have hung out with him a few times.
Yeah, it's great.
But yeah, it was just an amazing experience to be able to actually get to know all of these Cubs fans that I had sort of seen from afar, knew, just by reputation more than anything else, and to actually learn about them, and in some cases become friends with them. I got to interview Scott Turow, one of my all-time favorite authors. It was an amazing experience. I mean, and it took us to, I told you about our book release.
Yeah, that was here.
That was
book
here,
release was here, and
which was
it was amazing.
We filled up I think the bar was surprised how many people showed up for that. I mean, we literally packed this bar here.
There were Murphy's Bleachers here.
Yeah, we had about 200 people probably show up for this book release party. Several former Cubs players showed up. You know, Fergie Jenkins, a Hall of Famer, at one point showed up. And, you know,
That's
and then
amazing.
at some point near the end of it, a Clydesdale from Budweiser shows up. You know, and so my publisher takes our book to get a picture with the Clydesdale horse. You know, it's like, ooh, this is an opportunity that you can't pass up. You know, but that's the kind of book release party that you kind of dream about. That it turned out to be. I mean, it was amazing.
You have to pinch yourself when you're at the center of this thing. You're like, you know, it's like, I'd imagine it's how like musicians feel when they're all of a sudden touring the world. You know, it's like, my music brought me to Paris. You know, it's like,
I interviewed the owner of this bar at this very table for the book. I mean, Beth Murphy. I mean, I'd never met her before. I mean, you know, that was an opportunity to meet somebody that I kind of, you know, always heard about and knew. I mean, I hung out in her bar, you know, a lot of my adult life. I'd never met her, and this was an opportunity to actually get to know her and to hear her story, which was just great.
Wow. So, when we talked before getting together, you said you may be at the tail end of finishing up a new novel.
I literally reached the end of it yesterday. So yeah, that's also been in the works. It's called I don't know if I should say it or not, but I mean
it's okay. Yeah, whatever.
It's okay. It's called Havana Hangover. It's based on my. So in 2016, a friend of mine from law school and I started traveling to Cuba when they opened the doors. Obama opened the doors, and so we went in November 2016, and so this is what really probably stuck out. I mean, I'd always dreamed of going to Cuba for a lot of reasons. I was a Hemingway fanatic. But you know, it's also just one of those places that you know you've never been able to go to, and it was probably the top place on my bucket list. And so when you know they opened the doors, my friend and I, who had been traveling, you know, up until then every year to Key West. In November, we basically decided, you know, and every time we go to Key West, we said, you know, if they ever open the doors to Cuba, we've got to go to Cuba.
Sure.
You know, it's only 90 miles away, right? But we were always prevented from going there. And so, in 2016, we went, and so this is what stuck out in my mind this is what sort of was the nugget behind the whole novel. We left on the day that the Cubs won Game 6 of the World Series.
Holy cow! Really? You were out of the country then?
No. We went down to Miami.
Oh.
Because we had to, there were no direct flights from Chicago. So we were in Miami the night that the Cubs won.
Huh.
That day, I get a text from my good friend Pat asking me if I want to go to Cleveland.
No way.
He ended up going. I obviously couldn't go because I was on my way to Cuba. So I left that day that the Cubs were playing Game 7.
Oh.
So we were in Miami that night. I literally stayed up all that night. We started out at a bar in Miami. My friend said, you know, this is going on too late. We've got a flight at like 7 a.m. in the morning. And
you're like, come on.
I said, we can't just
There's
leave.
no way you can go to sleep.
He said, yeah, we got to get back to the hotel. So we left the bar. I made it back to watch the very last inning of. He was sleeping while I'm watching and screaming while the Cubs win the World Series.
It's got to be around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning.
2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. 3 hours later, I'm on a flight to Cuba.
How did you go to sleep that night?
I didn't.
Yeah, I didn't think you could.
I didn't sleep.
Oh my God.
So I'm living one dream, at the same time I'm thinking about this other dream. I have no idea what is happening in Chicago. And when we arrived in Cuba, there is nothing, there's no internet access. You can't tell what's going. Like, I had no idea. So for the next week, I'm in Cuba and not knowing what is happening in Chicago.
Oh my God. You don't know about the parade or
Nothing.
any of that
I
stuff.
knew nothing about it. And so, like, I was completely, like, all of that was just like, I was in a different world, and the world that I always dreamed of, I mean, this was like my life's dream was the Cubs to win the World Series,
Yeah.
and I didn't get to experience it other than in a hotel room at 2 o'clock in the morning with a flight at 7 o'clock
Wow. I
So-
mean, that's a story right there.
in the morning. So that was the impetus for the novel, because at the same time, a week later, when we came back, we had an election,
Yeah.
which the whole world turned upside down as I knew it. And at the time when I'm coming back, I'm getting texts from people, and again, I'm not getting information because I'm in a foreign country that has no internet access. I'm getting texts from people saying, I don't think you want to come back home.
Yeah, yeah. And they weren't kidding.
And they were not kidding. And so all of that is the sort of like
Jeez.
the background for what starts this novel that I wrote.
Holy moly.
And the other part of it was, while we're in Cuba, at one point my friend, we got separated at some point while we were in Cuba. And, you know, I woke up the next morning and there's a text on my phone saying, help me. So
That's all it said.
all of that comes together in this novel that I just wrote. So it became this, the novel that I ended up writing is sort of this, it's become a spy adventure story, and it's about love and friendship, and it's about geopolitics between Cuba and
geez.
Russia and the United States. I don't know if I can say any more than that.
No, but that's, I mean, just the discovery and research to put this together. There's a lot going into this.
Yeah, so this was the other part of it. I mean, so my friend and I, after that, in 2016, we went to Cuba the next 4 Novembers, 2016, 2017, 2018, and 2019. We had planned to go again in 2020. Obviously, that didn't happen because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And we haven't been back since. Not only the pandemic, but things in Cuba have changed completely.
Yeah.
Their economy has taken a turn for the worse. There have been uprisings politically. A lot of the worst parts of the things that were starting to change under Obama, it started to take a reverse course after Trump's changed the rules, and I don't know. It just, things started changing there, and it's just not been a good place or a safe place for Americans to go anymore. So, you know, I'm writing all this thinking that, like, every year that I'm going to go back there for inspiration while I'm writing this story. And we haven't been able to go back. So I've been basically writing this story about a place that, you know, was always, you know, this sort of exotic kind of dreamland, and that's become what it has been for me. I mean, it's like in my head now. It's yeah, again, it's like living, in those other novels that I wrote, where I was able to go back to these periods of my life and sort of relive them. This has been the way I've been able to sort of, even though I've not been able to travel to Cuba, I've been able to feel like I'm traveling there by writing this story, and that's kind of the way it's sort of developed. Which, and in a lot of ways, I look at it as this sort of love letter to Cuba. I mean, I made a lot of good friends there. I still have good friends there. A lot of them are not living there anymore because it's not a good place to be right now. Some of them have moved out of the country just to try to make money, and they send it back home to their families. It's just not it's a sad part of the reality of their world. I mean, but yeah, I mean, I've been able to sort of put all of that into this novel that I've been writing for 2 years, roughly.
Yeah.
Now.
Huh. Yeah, I mean, just getting the pieces together, and then you almost have to time travel in your mind to go back there. And
I mean, you can find a lot of things, obviously, on the internet, and that helps, but it's not the same as actually being there.
Yeah. Well, now that leaves us to one subject we haven't talked much about yet, is the Cubs. Are you hopeful this year? Are we going to even have a season this year?
Oh, God. I hope so.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see what MLB has planned.
I mean, it's hard to be optimistic about the Cubs period these days again. I mean, it seems like we're back into the years where, it was really hard to be a Cubs fan. You were a Cubs fan because this was your team, and, whether they won or lose, and that seems to be where we're back again. I mean, I'm not a fan of what the owners have done with the team and continue to do with the team. But at the same time, they will always be my team.
Well, you may...
I love this place.
Yeah.
I mean, I love these bleachers.
Yeah.
I mean, this is, to me, like a second home. I mean, I can't imagine having a summer not being able to sit out in those bleachers. I mean, that would be a really, really sad, summer for me. And I'm hoping, that, there's going to be a season, but at this point, who knows?
Well, you made in one of your essays, you talk about being a lovable loser our whole lives, and now we're not anymore, and it kind of feels good, We can kind of carry a little different attitude around being a Cubs fan now. So, well, I'm with you on that. I'm looking forward to the baseball season as well, and hopefully we'll be out here. I'm thinking of maybe doing a reunion every year of
maybe you can bring out the Schwindel-meter again.
The Schwindel-meter, that's OPS. I don't even want to get into that, how that's figured out, because that's another 15 minutes. But, so I'm looking forward to joining you and other friends out in this ballpark of ours that we love so much. So, Randy, thanks again. It's been a great pleasure to catch up with you. I appreciate it.
Thanks
All
for
right.
your time.
Yeah, thanks.